Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. We're excited to bring you a special guest, a longtime friend and colleague of OTT.X and myself, Craig Seidel, who is CTO of Pixelogic. We're going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, I guess. The genesis of this segment or this session came out of a series of working sessions that we did with some of our members about content operations and digital supply chain, specifically around ad-supported video. As we got together with members from across our community, we were hearing consistently that there's issues and challenges, a lot of inefficiencies in communicating rights data. We'll get into what we mean by that. I want to invite Craig to join me on the session now. There he is, out in the forest. Of course, he's wearing his jacket and his nice collared shirt, because that's what he does when he goes hunting or whatever it is he's doing out there in the forest. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Eric. Good to see you.
It's great. Thank you so much for being here. I mentioned that you'd spent a fair amount of time working in the digital supply chain space or the content operations space, maybe a few years. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about kind of your background in that area and where you've been and why you care.
Okay. Well, I'm CTO at Pixelogic, post-production localization distribution company, but the prior 15 or so years I spent at Movie Labs, which is a joint venture of the major studios, focused on improving technology in any way we could. But the area I kind of settled into was distribution supply chain, where there was just a lot of opportunities to do things better. So hopefully we've come up with ways of doing things better. And actually, a lot of those things are in use today, including where I'm working now.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. It's been a while since we've had a chance to dig into some of the supply chain topic in any level of detail. Those of you who know me, many of you know I've spent a bunch of time working in supply chain, but going all the way back to, I guess, around 2005 when I was at Microsoft working on the Xbox Live video marketplace. And I started there right at the very beginning, in a way, of when we started doing long form distribution of video. At that point, there was no streaming, actually. It was all about download. And so we started working with major studios at Microsoft, licensing content. And believe it or not, much of it was coming in on videotapes. We actually got a whole pallet of videotapes from one of our partners and had to capture them and code them ourselves, just to make them available. So things have come a long ways, but there's still a ton of challenges. One of the things that we learned back then was that everybody was doing it differently. That is, all the studios were sending us different formats of not only video, but of metadata and of rights data. And so that's really what we're going to get into today. There's, as I mentioned, a fair amount of, I guess, and a growing amount of angst or pain in terms of dealing with rights data and communicating it from one organization to another. And it's only going to get more complicated as the companies that are doing it, and many of you are members of OTT.X, it's going to get more complicated as you grow and as you scale, because you're going to want to go to different territories, different regions, different languages. You'll have different versions. So there's a lot of complexity, and we'll get into that a little bit right now. So Craig, let's just start off with rights. What do we mean by rights?
Yeah, I just want to first say that many of you may have seen Eric's swirling vortex presentation describing the digital supply chain, and it started off with this tape days, but I think we still have a bit of a swirling vortex that we're trying to tame through all this. So what do rights means? So there's a lot of focus on the the technical aspect of delivering content, the media file formats and encoders and other things like that. But there's a whole other set of business rules that go along with distributing content that need to be handled. And where there's been a lot of attention in organizations like SMPTE on the media formats, there hasn't been the same attention on all the licensing data and all the business data. Basically, if you have some content or set of content, who can you show it to? When can you show it? Where can you show it? And then what are all the SLAs and other kinds of business rules associated with delivering that content and getting it out to the consumer? So, sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's very complicated. So if it's let's say it's EST, electronic sell-through, there's going to be things like pricing. If it's going to be SVOD, there might be pricing across an entire package of titles. It won't be to the individual title, but you still have information like when it's going to go up and when it can be shown and when rights are available. Even with FAST, we're talking about like streaming free ad-supported television FAST. You're going to have rules about what you can show and when, and those are all parts of the business rules and rights data that need to be transmitted between content owner or licensor and whoever's going to be presenting it to the consumer.
Yeah, well, and speaking of FAST, I wonder if you talked about EST has pricing, obviously, and you don't really have that in FAST or in AVOD, but you may have something like, this title is allowed to be shown in this specific FAST channel, and how do you communicate that? And can we do that in the avails that we have now?
Yeah, we can. When I think of when we have something, I mean, we talk about avails as the avail spec, but there sometimes things get named just based on history. So the first thing we did was what was classically called the avails, and now that name sticks to it, but it really is a spec about business rules. And because avails are one of the most difficult problems to address, we addressed a lot of the thorny, nasty problems as part of working on avails. But as a byproduct of that, the simpler use cases are accommodated already. And you just use the tiny subset of the spec that you need to be able to address those particular issues, like with FAST. The advantage is that the spec contains the collective wisdom and collective pain of everybody who's worked on the issues that led into it. And so all the special cases and all the places where people mistakes have kind of been ironed out of it. So like, how do you express a date? Even, simple things like that, or how do you expect currency, or how do you express currency, or in the case of like a channel, how do you express a channel? Those are all in there because someone had that pain point or had that need somewhere along the way. And then it becomes an optional feature of the spec where people can use it if they need it or ignore it if they don't need it.
Okay, so we're jumping ahead a little bit because we're talking about a spec that we haven't really had a chance to. That's okay. I brought it up. I just get since we've been doing this for so long, it's just only natural that we kind of get into some of the details of the technical stuff. But just kind of going back just a step, why does this matter? Let's just talk about ad-supported video and whether that's FAST or AVOD or some other kind of ad-supported video. What's at stake with this? Why do we care about what gets communicated in terms of rights and all of the elements that you talked about, like where it can be communicated, and so why do we care?
Yeah, business rules aren't really an area where people want to make mistakes, and it is very easy to make mistakes. And when my favorite precursor to working on the technical aspect was someone would create a Word document, they'd print it, scan it, and email the scan of the printed PDF. It's like, okay, or it's like, really? Is that how you do it? And then you have people making transcription errors and all the other things that can go wrong. And the title is ambiguous, perhaps, or there might be two things with similar titles, or you specify an episode number that refers to a different episode ordering than is being handled in a particular case. There's like 1,001 things that can go wrong, and the goal here is just to avoid mistakes. I guess that's half of it. The other half of it is to make the whole process run smoothly. It takes time to print that Word document and scan it and email the scan. And especially if it's being generated from a system, that's just silly. But even if it's not generated from a system, it's still, if it's in a spreadsheet or something like that, it's much better to transmit it directly as opposed to going through a bunch of intermediate steps to get it from one place to another.
Yeah, and thinking back, to my days working at Microsoft and Amazon and other organizations that were dealing with lots and lots of video, making it available. It's important that it's on your service on the day that it's supposed to be, at the time that it's supposed to be. And so you need to know what day and time that is in order to make that happen. And if you're just relying on someone sending you metadata in a file and not even keeping track of it, then you may or may not get that video on your service when it's supposed to be there. You may get a different video that's not even the right one, and you won't have any way to know that, right? If you're not tracking the rights that you've licensed and matching it up against the content that you're getting. If you're just taking feeds and dropping them on whenever the sender is telling you to. There's also problems with making sure that you have the right versions of these assets, and that's really important. You get the wrong version of a title, it could be a huge impact on your service, on your business, and definitely on your viewers if you're expecting to get an edited version that is edited for all audiences and the one you get isn't, right? It's maybe a rated R version or a more grown-up version of whatever the asset might be. And that's not what you're expecting. That's not what you license. But, a lot of this protects us from kind of making the mistakes that get made. There's, when you've got tons and tons of video assets flying around, and they all have names that are 15 character, 13 character GUIDs or whatever it is, you don't know what that thing is until it's on your service. So that's another real important reason to keep track of this stuff. There's different versions, there's different languages, there's different localization types. You may get a sub or a dub. Keeping track of what you've licensed and what you're expecting is what keeps your service in line with the content on your service in line with what you've actually licensed, and helps you to prepare for it.
Yeah, there's some sort of squirrely problems in there too. So you get something, it's the right title, great. It's the exact same length, great, must be the right version. Not a different regional edit or something like that. Well, it turns out that it has music that's synchronized, but not licensed in that territory. And so now you're going to get sued because you're playing, some unlicensed music, in a show. Yeah, so you really want to get all that stuff right. I mean, air traffic control systems are all in English. There's a reason they all speak the same language. We're sort of metaphorically all speaking the same language here.
Yeah, there's and as right now, I think fast is still a little bit of the wild, wild west, compared to some of the maturity of some of the other platforms for distributing video. And so it's kind of under the radar a little bit. But the time to get organized on this and to start doing it in a consistent and repeatable way, in a systematic way that's going to scale, the time to do that is now, not after the proverbial stuff that hits the fan. So, get on top of this now, especially if you don't have gigantic volumes of video, because this is when it's much easier to fix things and set up systems to be able to manage it.
Yeah, there are a lot of, like I said, a lot of the work that's been done so far, it reflects the pain that occurred because the work hadn't been done yet. Fast has kind of the opportunity to build on that work and avoid the pain. Issues will come up. Maybe no one's been caught for having the wrong synchronization, music synchronization, but it will happen.
Hmm.
In terms of the wrong edit or being shown at the wrong time, like during a holdback or something like that. All those situations will eventually occur. And what happens is you start off with something simple, and then you have to keep trying to retrofit it in order to handle all the special cases. Just start with something that's already considered the special cases, um, and hopefully avoid the pitfalls down the road. That's not to say that there aren't perfectly useful, very simple solutions. Um, you know, we're not advocating abandoning those, but just use them with the understanding that at some point they're going to run out of steam, and you're going to need to think about how to take it to the next level. And those approaches may or may not be able to accommodate that.
Yeah, and if I don't know if you're either licensing content from a partner or you're licensing content to someone else, you got to you're keeping track of somewhere of what you've licensed. And maybe it's just a list of titles. I licensed season 1 through 5 of MacGyver, and I just know that. And okay, maybe you can kind of know that, and it starts, assets start showing up, and it looks like you're getting MacGyver, and they're on your service. But there's so many issues with, if that's all you have, and you can keep track of that. I got 1 through 5. I'm the MacGyver channel. How many episodes are in that, and how do you know if you've gotten them all? You've got to be keeping track of this somewhere, and so that means it's probably in a spreadsheet or something like that. Um, and so you're making up your own sort of like format for holding rights data right now in a spreadsheet someplace, and that's going to work, as Craig says, for a while. But as soon as it starts getting more complicated than that, you want more than MacGyver. You want Bewitched, and you're going to do the whole '70s calendar of television shows. Once you start getting more complex, you can't keep it in your head, and there's more complexities about it. Now you start licensing to different countries or different territories. There are different rules about all of that, and so taking advantage of just the naming conventions. That's really all we're talking about here. So and the way they're organized, what they mean, will save you a lot of time and effort down the road. So getting to the avail spec a little bit, there is a standard,
But
a best
by,
practice.
by the way, aren't there two MacGyvers?
There
Didn't they
are.
do
Maybe there's probably more than that. There's
no, but I
no
mean,
shade.
didn't they restart MacGyver with a completely different cast? And isn't there a new MacGyver?
Well, is there a show, a MacGyver show?
I
Somebody
think
can
there's a new
answer
show
that question.
MacGyver.
I know there's a movie or something, and then there's
So
the.
if you don't know which MacGyver you license, do you?
There you go. See, that's a perfect example. It's yeah, and you may end up getting the wrong one. And the avail, the rights management spec can help you do that by identifying what you've licensed, and you can then match that up with what you receive. And if it doesn't match, that's when you know to make some calls and try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah,
So
and keep in mind that there are multiple parties involved, because you might be licensed MacGyver by somebody, but the MacGyver might get delivered to you from a third party, someone like Pixelogic or something.
that's
Well,
right.
if Pixelogic doesn't know which MacGyver it is, we'll just send you the wrong thing. And
Hope for the best.
if nothing else, it'll create time and delay, but it could also ultimately end up with the airing of the wrong title. Of
Yeah.
course, we would never do that, but just in hypothetical.
No, not Pixelogic, but it's been known to happen. So we've been talking kind of around this avail spec for a little bit. Craig, how about a little history? Where did this thing come from? Has it been around for a while? And who made it?
So let's get some credit where credit is due. The original Avail spreadsheet started with Sony Pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and they had done a really excellent job with it. And then it came into what is now OTT.X, and a bunch of us pounced on it and started working on it. And it's split into an Excel version and an XML version. So both of them still exist today. And it started again as avails, and that. But after not too long, people said, well, it's not just one business model. It's not just TVOD, transactional VOD. We said, well, they said, well, what about SVOD? SVOD uses a title list, which is a completely different concept and demands a completely different spec. So we looked at it and said, well, we think we can use the same spec. And in the end, there was about 3 new fields unique to SVOD, and all the rest were either improvements to TVOD or already there. So the SVOD and the TVOD specs became the same. And then we looked at a bunch of other business models, and it turns out that they all basically need the same data. There's some kind of time frame in it. There's some kind of territory in it. Obviously, some kind of title. Some bunch of bookkeeping stuff like who's the licensor and who's the licensee. Optionally, some pricing models depending on but even if it's like SVOD, it still might be in a group of titles, so you might need to group things and so forth. Channels. All the good stuff that you need to transmit when licensing something. If there's any need to either track it or report on it or just know what it is that's being delivered. There's also links to other things like the actual information that you need to fulfill it. Where do you find the files? Stuff like that. So all that stuff got consolidated, and then so the way these specs works is you start off with a big old spec that does everything in the world, and then you start paring it down for specific use cases. And so what we did is we said, okay, for movie TVOD, you need these things. For television TVOD, you need these things. For SVOD, you need these things. If you're going to do bundles, you need these things, and so on and so forth, and created subsets of the spec that solve particular problems. And those subsets even have subsets amongst themselves because there's a few required parameters, which is relatively small list, and then a bunch of optional stuff. So people will use the optional as appropriate for their particular business relationships. One of the design goals of this spec, which make it a little bit different than other specs, is it's designed to carry bilateral information that's confidential to the parties. So if you have terms that are unique to you, there's ways of accommodating that. For example, if you had this like new business model of alternate Tuesday pricing or something like that, and you wanted to express alternate Tuesday pricing without telling anyone else in the industry that you were doing it, then that information could go into the spec. So whatever it is that you need it was designed to be pretty flexible and accommodating. I think the crown jewel of it is not the collection of all the information, but the definition of each individual piece of information. So when we talk about language or territory or identifiers or license type, there's controlled vocabulary and formatting and all that around that, so there's no ambiguity. For example, if you say time zone or time, there's going to be a time zone associated with that. If you say date, there's going to be a time zone associated with it. Does that mean it's going to go? If you say it's going live on April 6th, does that mean April 6th Eastern time? Midnight? What does that actually mean? So there's ways of expressing all that stuff very precisely, so there's no mistakes. So we call that the data dictionary. I think that's actually the crown jewel of the spec, not the fields itself.
That's the thing that when it seems pretty simple. How hard can this be? I've got a title, I've got a date that is supposed to go live, I've got a date that is supposed to come off. Like I don't, this is the thing is though, as Craig's pointing out, once you start to peel back the onion a little bit, it starts getting more complicated. And date, time, what time zone are we talking about, and how do I even express that in a way that everybody's going to understand? And all of these things, when you talk, okay, you've got a title. Well, is it going to be in sort order, like, or is it? So am I going to put, if it's the MacGyver series, is it going to be MacGyver, comma the, or is it going to be the MacGyver series? And how are we going to agree to do that? And if it's an identifier, what is that identifier? How do I know when what I've licensed? How do I know how to match it with the assets that show up? These are problems that have kind of been dealt with, and there's been a lot of work from that these businesses in the AVOD and the ad-supported world can take advantage of. And you can try to define all this stuff yourself and work it out bilaterally between your own the partners that you have, and spend a lot of time on that. And you will spend a lot of time on it. Or you can take advantage of the work that's already been done and look at the Avail spec that's been developed, as Craig's referencing. When did we start working on this thing, actually?
Ooh. Oh, now you're going to test me. I would say
like 2010, 2011, maybe
something like that. So the first common metadata spec was published 2010, and it started after that, but not too much later.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a while.
And it was in constant kind of generation. For a long time, we were getting together with major parties. So first of all, yeah, let's. I referenced kind of the workflow, or the concept of, you've licensed content, you've got a list of stuff you've licensed, you put it in a spreadsheet somewhere with some attributes. And then you license something from someone else and you put them in the spreadsheet with some attributes. And as time goes on, you get, not tens, not hundreds, but thousands and thousands of records in the spreadsheet. And it's all coming into you in different formats, because the partners that you're working with, maybe they're not using a standard, you're not using a standard. So it's getting into a spreadsheet on your side somehow, and you're cutting and pasting and copying, and through all of this process, there's a whole lot of work when you're talking about thousands of records, and it's changing because the dates are changing, and it's going to be wrong sometimes because people type things incorrectly, and maybe when you're cutting and pasting, you're putting it in the wrong rows, and things get messed up. So that's really why it's super valuable to have a standard, because then you can reach out to your partners and say, send us the data in the format, and then you don't even have to cut and paste it anymore. You can program your machines to be able to ingest it, to suck it into your write system, so you don't have to touch it anymore. And it's not just when you're originally receiving it. There's standards associated with changes as well. So
I just want to say, if the Avail spec, of all the specs that have been done with OTT.X, things like Media Manifest Core and Media Entertainment Core and so forth, the Avails is the most adopted spec. It's the one that people have found it the easiest to start using and the most valuable to use. Google was one of the first adopters, and granted, I realize that not everyone is Google in terms of capabilities and so forth, or armies of software engineers, but they had like a 95% reduction in time to process in Avail with the Avail, it wasn't just eliminating manual processes, it was eliminating redundant manual processes. Like, someone would do something, then someone would check it, and then someone would check them, and then they do something else and someone would check that. So just removing all the manual checks to make sure people weren't mistyping things saved an enormous amount of time.
Yeah, that's right. When you're doing things manually, then you have to have QC to make sure that it got done right, because there's going to be certain occasions where it just gets typed in wrong or copied and pasted wrong. And if you have a repeatable process that's done by machines, it's going to be done the same way every time, and you have way less of that kind of a risk. So you mentioned Google. Who are some of the players that have adopted the Avail spec?
Well, I can name the easy answer is everyone. I mean, the bigger players have adopted it. The problem, the reason I have some hesitation answering that, because when people adopt it, they don't necessarily tell us. So so the people we know adopted are the people who either are participating in the groups that are writing it, or people who will like send us email and say, I don't understand this thing. Can you help us out? But we do land on people all the time who've adopted it that we had no idea had adopted it. So
Right,
it's kind
that's
of
true.
hard to
But
answer that
at
question.
least we know all the major studios have adopted it. So, that's Warner Brothers, NBCU, Lionsgate, Disney, Movie Labs is using it, and major platforms in distribution on the TVOD side: Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Fandango, Vudu. Um, in fact, all anybody that's doing TVOD has adopted it, with the exception, probably of Apple. They started things off with.
I was gonna say I can tell you who's not using it, but
Yeah, and that may be it. So it's the thing's very well adopted, and if you're distributing to any of those platforms, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Fandango, and you're not using the Avail spec, I'm a little surprised because I know that Google requires it. At least that's what they tell us, but they will accept it. So, and it can make things easier for Google. And by making things easier for Google or these large platforms, it makes it makes it easier in terms of I think getting business done when it's less work and less expense for the distribution partners.
yeah, it's also being used in a lot of the sort of internal services, like studios who have created their own service kind of thing.
That's right.
People think of studios as being monolithic, but they have their own departments and own problems in terms of different systems talking to each other. So when you have these, I don't want to name any services, but you know who they are. Many of them are using the Avail spec just to say within the same company, this is when these titles will go live on the service, or not when they come down. If you've noticed, it's not only important when things go up, it's also important when things go down, because one is it's licensing, but it's also a marketing. You create demand by scarcity, and so when service things come and go from services, people you'll see it. Watch this now disappearing at the end of the month. Then
Hmm.
the usage numbers spike on that title because it's going away at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So all of those strategies are are part of the picture.
We didn't talk about that either. That's another really great reason, a really important reason to be keeping track at a detailed level of the rights that you have, when they're supposed to go up, when they're supposed to come down, where all of that's supposed to happen. Because first of all, you want to promote it. If something's coming live on your service and hasn't been there before, you want to do some marketing about it ahead of time. Coming next Tuesday, MacGyver, or and then as it's before it leaves, you can market that as well. But if you're not tracking that someplace, it's really difficult to do that. So if you're just relying on someone to send you feeds of what they want to show up on your service, then you're kind of at the whim of whoever's sending that, and it's really difficult to help promote it. Yeah, so I think
Yeah,
all of the major
and
studio. Go ahead.
I was going to say there are also provisions there for marketing promotions. So, in the TVOD world, you might talk about temporary price reduction, but there's also other provisions where you can say that we want to do something related to this title. Maybe there's some agreement in terms of doing some additional advertising or placement or something like that. Placement on a site. Those kind of things can work their way into the spec as well if needed. I mean, I should say it's there. If people want to use it, they can.
There's
So it's
also.
more than just the sort of mundane stuff. It's some of the more like customer engaging kind of things are in there too.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I mean, there's even rules about when you can promote something, right? You're not allowed to start promoting this until X date, and that's particularly the case with movies, um, and that's again made available in the spec, because we've come across those problems before.
Yeah, when we're working on the spec, I learned terms like suppression lift date. And so I didn't know what these things were. So I ended up drawing a picture, which is in the spec now, which is like over time, these dates say when you can do what. And again, that sort of gets to the ambiguity of expressing things. But as you know, putting up a trailer early, or offering something before it's supposed to be offered in any way is always a bad thing. And there's even to the point where studios withhold content because they don't want to risk it going up on the site. So they will give you if you're a platform, you'll get the content at the last minute because the studio doesn't trust you to hold it. Mm-hmm. If you have a system in place to be able to ensure that content won't go up, then you might actually get it a lot earlier and have a lot less of a frantic rush to get it available for streaming than you would, in the current model. But I hear those discussions in studios, like, don't give it to them before the date because they'll just put it on their site.
And then it's, speaking of the frantic rush, that's exactly what happens, and something shows up and it's supposed to be live actually yesterday. So then everybody's dropping everything to get that title ready to get it up on the service. You've already missed, maybe a day or more of availability when your competitors have had it. And so, having an avail or the rights management system, and then have the interface through the avail to make it a much more seamless to ingest and manage all of that data is really, really valuable. Okay, well, let's talk about the application for ad-supported video a little bit, Craig. Right now, our avail spec, if you open up the spreadsheet, has 109 fields in it or something like that. And if I'm just getting, kind of started with the avail spec and listen to Craig and Eric pontificate about how important it is and how valuable it can be, and I'm ready to get going. So I pop this thing open, and it's 109 fields. I'm probably, going to be a little bit overwhelmed. Do I really need 109 fields? Can you talk a little bit about maybe talking me back into using this spec after I open it up and see that?
Yeah. So, okay, if I share it, can I share it?
I don't know. Yes, you can. Let me make sure that we've enabled that.
Let's give this a shot here. I kind of feel like this is nerding out, but sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words or something like that.
Oh, okay. So don't be scared.
All right.
There's a lot going on. It's a spreadsheet.
Waha! Okay, so if you open the spreadsheet, you see this, which is just some general instructions on how to use it. This is the data dictionary that I talked about, and actually it's 129 fields, or they're grouped though. Like, these are all about avails. These are about the transactions. So a lot of that's the business rules. These are all about metadata, a lot of metadata. But it's things like, are captions included? What are the ratings on it? Things
Mm-hmm.
like that. Because sometimes, you can't show things if it's the wrong rating. More transactional stuff like, is HDR licensed?
All that stuff can be different too. So you're talking about dates, like, the date that the HD version might be different than the date that the 4K version is available, and the date of the R-rated or mature audience version might be different than the other ones. So, it's important to be able to track that at that level of detail.
And then, there's a simple start and end. But then there's, like, if you want to go crazy there, if it's tied to something else, you can tie it to other things. Pricing stuff. There's more famous suppression lift date, and special pre-order fulfillment date, and all that. This is the asset itself, so you can find the right thing, the right MacGyver. More metadata. Then there's also some statusing mechanisms that are kind of what comes back as opposed to what goes out. So you can say, this is what really happened, as opposed to this is what was supposed to happen. And then just a bunch of reference stuff. Anyhow, so it looks really intimidating. I'm intimidated. It's like, it would take a lifetime to learn all of these different fields.
Or at least a couple days.
But At least a couple decades. So let's look at, what do you have here? So this is what an avail would actually look like. Obviously the data is kind of dummy, and where these fields are blank, they would just be blank. If you look in this row, there's optional fields, required fields. So the only fields that are needed are the required. You notice that it's a relatively small set of fields that are required. A bunch of places for identifiers if you want them. We encourage the use of ITER, but it's not necessary, whatever identifiers are agreed upon. And so on and so forth. So this is what I should attempt TV first, because TV, or I should have shown movies first because it's less complicated. TV is more complicated because you have to keep all the season, series, and episode stuff right. But again, this is English movie called this, being from Rockstar Films here. This is an electronic sell-through avail, library title, HD, the start and end date, pricing, and then the identification. And but notice that even a lot of this stuff is optional.
So that's pretty much it.
That's it. And so, with literally, you could probably make an avail with half a dozen fields and still be compliant with the specification. So that I think is the real key here is, if you start with a more general specification and use the subset of it, the minimal subset, you can expand into it while still being compliant with the specification. If you start with something that's not designed for what you're doing, but kind of like you can shoehorn it in, when you go to expand it, you'll probably not be compliant with the specification. So I saw some MRSS stuff, which is great, by the way. The idea of using like a news feed to show content availability is great. As a matter of fact, you can put avail specs on MRSS as well if you so choose, or on RSS feed. Mm-hmm. But the MRSS spec itself doesn't accommodate everything that avails accommodates. So to the extent that you ever run into those issues, now you're going to have a non-compliant MRSS feed. So don't get me wrong, I'm not discouraging the use of MRSS. I think it's a great way to go, and I think it allows people to get things up and running pretty fast, and it's a nice way of communicating that things are being updated. But just as I said earlier, you adopt with caution, in the sense that know that if you're going, whether it's going to meet your future needs.
Well, I mean, they're kind of two different things too. An MRSS feed is, folks are using that to distribute content. So it's, it actually gives you a link to the video asset itself. It doesn't tell you in advance that you're going to be getting it or what you've licensed, and like the thousands of titles that you just licensed for some period of time so you can put it into your rights management system. And so, being able to know in advance, like next week, we're expecting these 12 titles from this partner. You can start then, if they're supposed to go live on Wednesday, we need to have them all in-house or ready to roll by Monday. We need the metadata because we need to check it, or we need to, like, whatever processes you have, and just to be able to know what you're supposed to get, to make sure that it really is there. You spend a bunch of time on the business side licensing stuff, licensing video. Did it really show up? Is it really on your service when it's supposed to be? And so if you're just taking an MRS feed of what someone's sending you, you're missing out. There's a potentially big gap in your process. I've seen, I've worked at quite large organizations that weren't doing the best job at that, and there's content that they licensed that didn't show up, and it wasn't on the service, and they didn't even know, because they weren't really tracking what was supposed to be there when. And so I think that's why avails are super important. Another real valuable mechanism that they're serving.
I should probably talk for a second about MRSS if people aren't familiar with it.
Yeah.
MRSS stands for Media RSS, and RSS is the protocol used by news feeds. back in the day. Right? It's been around for a long time. I think MRSS was developed by Yahoo. It's been adopted by companies like Roku, I think. Roku has it on their website. I don't know whether they're using it or not anymore, but it's basically a news feed. So as things come out, they get added onto all the previous stories, and basically think of it as just like a long list of messages, and then you can pull information from those messages. The the MRSS spec, the reason it's MRSS is that it has a bunch of metadata in it that, like things like titles and, other information about the content that describes, media related things. It's not really that focused on licensing, because the presumption, like if you're have a news reader, you're going to be able to read whatever news it's putting up there. So, it'll provide links to it, and the whatever happens at the other end of the link is whatever happens at the other end of the link. So this needs to be it needs to be managed. There needs to be security around it, because you just want to have links to content that are unsecure, but those are solvable problems. But it's a really kind of cheap and easy way of saying here's the content out there. If you want to get more sophisticated, then you start to put other things in the MRSS feed. You add layers of security on it, web-based security like basic auth or OAuth, and you can keep adding layers to accommodate whatever needs you need. But there was an API spec. There is an API spec for the things like Avails and MMC, and it actually uses Atom as opposed to RSS, but Atom is the successor to RSS, so same basic idea. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in using that kind of feed, that's something that would be great to discuss within OTT.X. We talk about best practices and ways to use it, most effectively.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We're seeing quite a bit of MRSS now, especially in the ad-supported space. It's an easy way to get content, I think, live. And it's being kind of extended or stretched, I think, beyond really what it's necessarily intended for. When it comes to explaining rights, and I think that there's potentially some things we could do with it, but also I think that folks are going to start seeing the kind of the gaps with it, and start patching those gaps. Generally, those patches, when things start breaking and you realize there's a bunch of content that you don't have live that you're supposed to have live, or something that somebody sent you in an MRSS feed is the wrong thing and you've got that live, or you're a studio and you sent something to somebody and it's not live. You got to track your own rights, and you've got to compare it with what's live. And how do you do that? That's in a rights management system, and how do you get data into it? That's what the Avail's about. But typically what happens is, when things start breaking, you start patching them with people's time. And so that's how you end up with more and more people doing more and more less valuable work. And that's kind of where the swirling vortex comes in, because these people are then on the phone, they're getting emails, they're getting documents, and this is what you really want to avoid. And so if you're not there now, it's a good time to start thinking about leveraging the specifications, in particular in this case, the Avail spec that we've been talking about. There's others as well in metadata. If you are there now, it's well past time to start thinking about that, and we'd love to help you with it. So if you're listening in today, watching us, and you're interested, please do reach out to myself, and we'd love to help you understand a little more about what's going on in Avails and other specifications. That's one of the reasons we're here at OTT.X, and why we're so glad you've joined us. We can help connect you with the resources. If it's necessary or if it's valuable, we can spin up an interest group about these topics as well, where we can dive into them and try to solve some of the problems that are specific to the AVOD space. There may be interpretations, I guess, of the Avail spec that we haven't really thought of necessarily when it pertains to ad-supported video. And so it could be that we could even update the spec or update some of the definitions, add some examples to make it easier for those in the industry who want to use it for new business uses and to be able to do so.
Yeah, by the way, you said we can, first I want to say, if people have questions, you can toss it into Q&A. But you sort of said we could update the spec. You said it with the improper level of enthusiasm. It's like, we absolutely can update the spec. If there's a need that's not reflected in the spec, those needs get reflected in the spec. I mean, it's not a magical process. It just needs to get done. And the Avail spec has actually been
for like a decade and a half.
So we update the specs generally once a year. There weren't updates to the Avail spec last year, mainly because it's a mature spec. But if you get, start introducing new business, types and lines and so forth, that's the time to update it. We have a lot of experience doing it, and it's pretty easy. I just want to add also that OTT.X is kind of, I mentioned wisdom before. OTT.X is kind of a wisdom concentrator in the sense that it brings together people from different, all sides of a problem together. So people can share their needs, their experiences, their mistakes, and then capture those either in, Wednesday webinars or in the specs themselves, or both. So that's the idea, is get the right people in the room, and good things happen.
I like that. OTT.X, concentrated wisdom. Maybe we're going to use that for something.
Actually, I should work on taglines.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're gonna. Any last words, Craig? Because I think we're about at time here.
No, just thanks for including me in this discussion. I am most excited always about what comes next. So if people can, let us know what their needs are, what problems they're having, and we can, make the world a better place, at least as it applies to business terms in the media world. That's what I like. That's what I enjoy doing. So
absolutely. And yeah, and it's we all have limited resources. Let's try to have them focus on things that are valuable and important that machines can't do for us, right? And so in case of managing data and getting it from one place to another, like, machines are really, really good at that. And we just need to kind of set up the consistency in the way we want to communicate, so that the systems, the programs, the software can do it for us, and then we can focus on more interesting and value-adding tasks. All right, well, with that, we're going to close things up for this session. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thanks so much, Craig. This has been great having a chance to talk about it. Maybe we'll do it again. We'll talk about metadata or some of the other.
There we go.
As well next. I want to first of all thank Whip Media for sponsoring the session today and all of the Wednesday webinar sessions. Whip has been great partners for us and great partners for our industry. Thank you so much to Whip. I want to invite everybody also to some upcoming events that we've got on our calendar. First of all, we're going to be in fabulous Las Vegas once again, returning for NAB on April 24th. We're hosting a cocktail party with RSG Media and DPP, so do check that out from 5 to 6:30. It's going to be at the Future of Delivery Lounge in Las Vegas Convention Center's newly built West Hall. So head on over there on that Sunday evening. We'd love to see you. We have a brand new event also. I'm sure you've heard of it, the X Fronts, on May 24th and 25th at the Scrub Hall Center in Los Angeles. It's a 2-day exchange consisting of pitches, presentations by prominent and up-and-coming AVOD and FAST platforms, networks, and channels to an audience of brands, advertisers, and ad agencies. Looking forward to getting that event kicked off. It's going to be fantastic. We've got a great lineup of presentations as well. So do check that out. Again, the Wednesday webinar series is ongoing. We've got, in fact, one of the first Leadership Development Foundation presentations coming up on April 20th. A really insightful panel with leaders from across our industry, and they'll be discussing culture and the work environment in the post-pandemic and I guess the post-2020 world. Super interesting conversation. So with that, I want to thank again everybody for joining us, and Craig and our sponsors. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.